He had only come to court to ask for justice, a simple request, a basic right of an ordinary citizen. But the moment he stepped through that large door, every eye inside the grand hall turned towards him. It wasn't just curiosity, it was an unspoken, judgmental look. Some faces showed surprise, maybe wondering how he dared to come here at all. Some showed contempt, that same age-old prejudice that separates the rich from the poor, the powerful from the weak. And some carried that silent, cold hatred which is never spoken, the kind that passes down from generation to generation. His simple clothes, the color of his hard-working skin, and the fear and helplessness hidden in his eyes. Everyone there, the judge, the lawyers, the clerks, and the spectators, had already made their decision even before the law book was opened. On the other side was her, the woman who once trusted him, who once loved him. But now that love had turned into evidence on paper, locked inside a legal document. And beside her stood another woman, whose smile clearly showed pride in victory, the confidence that she would win because that's how the world works. But today was different. Because this day, the court wasn't just hearing an ordinary case, not just a property dispute or a family conflict. Today, the very meaning of justice was about to be decided. Today, it would be determined whether the scales of justice would weigh only the evidence or also the burden of centuries-old prejudice and social pressure. No one knew that within a few minutes, a decision would be made that would change not only the lives of these three, the petitioner, the first woman, and the one with the victorious smile, but also challenge an entire mindset, a chain that had existed for centuries. Sometimes, court judgments don't just deliver the law, they write history. And this was that moment, when before everyone's eyes, justice saw color.
Marcus Taylor, he was an ordinary man, at least that's what he believed. A man living his life, doing his job. He worked as a photographer for a small city newspaper. Every morning he caught the bus with his camera bag as usual, and every evening he walked the same old path back home. The walls of his house were covered with photographs, some of streets, some of people's ups and downs in life, and among all of them, one picture of Emma, his wife. They often said to each other, "Our story is like a photograph, real but not acceptable to everyone." Marcus was black and Emma was white. And in that city, no matter how loudly the law claimed equality, people's eyes still judged by color. Every relationship was weighed on that same unfair scale. At first, they believed their love could overcome everything, that it was strong enough to break every social wall. But slowly, that strong love started to fade into the cracks where society quietly poisons everything. Emma's family left her, friends drifted away, and some neighbors even stopped greeting them. Marcus smiled, tried to stay strong, and said, "Don't worry, one day everything will be fine. They'll accept us too." But the truth was, with each passing day, that beautiful hope faded a little more. The past few months had been strange. Emma had started to change. She spoke less and thought more. She spent long nights on the phone, and the most painful thing was, she even avoided the flash of Marcus's camera, as if she no longer wanted to see herself in his pictures. One evening, he asked softly, carefully, "Is everything okay?" And she replied in a broken sentence, "Yes, I'm just tired." That day, Marcus realized that the distance he once saw in the eyes of strangers on the streets had now entered his own home. But Marcus didn't know that Emma's silence wasn't just about tiredness or unease. It had become a decision, a secret promise, and a deep betrayal. A few days later, when he came home, a terrifying piece of paper was lying at the door. Notice of divorce. And below it, Emma's signature. At that moment, time seemed to stop for Marcus. His story went out of focus, like a camera lens losing clarity. He didn't want to go to court, didn't want to fight, but he had to because without justice, the story he was living would remain incomplete. In the old part of the city, The courthouse stood as an ancient building where it felt like both time and justice had stopped within its cracked walls. People came and went, cases were heard, but some looks never changed, narrow, judging, and always seeing color first. For Marcus, this wasn't just a case, it was a test of his existence, a test of his worth and the sincerity of his love. He didn't know that the day he would step through the courthouse doors, it wouldn't just mark the end of his marriage, it would reveal a truth, a secret so deep that it would break the silence of generations.
When the court bell rang, Marcus took a deep breath. It wasn't just a breath. It was an attempt to release centuries of suffocation. The papers in his hands were trembling, as if they too knew that today was not just another case, but a decision that would be written into history. As he stepped into the hall, his eyes fell on the scene that had become the center of his life. Emma sat across from him, silent, like stone. On her right was her new lawyer, confident and powerful, and on her left, the woman Marcus knew only through neighborhood whispers and pictures on the phone. The same woman whose rumors had often planted thorns in his heart. There was no sign of guilt in Emma's eyes, only strangeness, as if she refused to recognize him, as if Marcus was just a forgotten chapter of her past. The judge entered the room. White hair, a stern face, and that cold look, one that appeared neutral, but Marcus knew better. That gaze too, like all others, saw color first. The hearing began. Emma's lawyer picked up the papers and spoke in a clear, cold voice. "My lord, my client only wanted love and peace in her marriage, but what she received was abuse and mental torture." The word abuse exploded in the air like a bomb. The room stayed silent, but Marcus could feel the looks on every face saying the same thing. "Yes, we know what people like you are like." He stood up, wanting to say a word, to explain a lie, but his lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder. Not now. But for Marcus, not now meant never. Every sentence in Emma's statement felt like a wound. She said Marcus was angry, that she was afraid of him. No proof, only words. But for the court, her words were enough, because she was white and he was not. Then the judge took off his glasses and looked straight at Marcus. "Do you have anything to say?" Marcus lowered his eyes, then said softly, in a faint voice, "My lord, I loved her, and that is my crime." There were whispers around the room. Someone coughed to hide a reaction. The judge pressed a faint smile, placed his pen on the desk, and said, "We deal with facts here, Mr. Taylor, not emotions." Marcus wanted to tell his side. How he lost his job because his editor had told him, "Your photos are good, but maybe our readers won't like your face." How he stayed awake at night because someone had spray painted the word traitor on his car. But in that courtroom, there was no time for those truths. The woman standing with Emma, she kept smiling, as if it were all a grand game. When the witness was called, she stepped forward.
"I am an eyewitness to this relationship," she said. Her words were sweet, but their meaning was poison. "I've seen Emma cry. She told me she's afraid of her husband." Something broke inside Marcus. He knew it was a lie, but this lie had the kind of power that truth never had, the power of color, of status, of privilege. When the court took a break, Marcus went outside. In the corridor, light and shadow mixed. A reporter raised a camera to his face. "Mr. Taylor, do you believe this trial is biased against you?" Marcus thought for a moment, then, with new confidence, said, "This trial isn't against me, it's against my color." The next day, that line became the headline in every newspaper. "Black husband claims racist court bias in divorce trial." Some people laughed. Some said, "Same old excuse." But some stayed silent because they knew he was telling the truth. When the hearing resumed the next day, The atmosphere had changed. The judge's tone was colder, Emma's eyes harsher, perhaps because of media pressure. Marcus's lawyer tried to present testimony, but every objection was dismissed as irrelevant. At that moment, Marcus realized that the courtroom was a place where justice wasn't written on the walls, it was written on faces. As the final session neared its end, the judge closed his file. "I will reserve the judgment. It will be announced tomorrow morning." Marcus looked back. Emma was gone. Only that same woman remained, the one who had been smiling since the first day. She stepped forward, came close to Marcus, and whispered, "Never thought someone like you could be this brave. But in the end, you'll get what you always get. Nothing." In that moment, time froze. The papers slipped from Marcus's hands, but something inside him awoke. He knew this wasn't just a case, it was a question of dignity for an entire generation. As he walked out of the courthouse, the sky was dark. Rain was about to fall. He looked up, as if asking God, "Will justice ever stop being white?" And the next morning, when the courthouse doors opened again, the room was silent, but one empty chair was about to change everything.
The morning light was coming through the courthouse windows, but the room still felt cold and lifeless. Every eye was fixed on the empty chair in front. Emma wasn't there. The judge opened his file, straightened his pen, and spoke in his usual serious tone. "The court has carefully reviewed the statements, evidence, and arguments from both sides." Marcus's heartbeat was pounding like a drum. He twisted his hands together as if trying to find his last bit of hope in the silence between his fingers. The judge continued, "The court believes that trust in this relationship has been completely broken. Therefore," the sentence stopped. At that moment, the door opened. A police officer walked in, holding a file in his hand, his face carrying a seriousness that spoke of something unusual. "My lord, these documents have just been received. They're part of a confidential complaint filed by Emma Taylor." The judge raised his eyebrows. "But the case is already concluded." "Yes, sir, but these contain new evidence, bank transfers, an insurance claim, and some emails." The room froze. Marcus looked up. Emma was nowhere to be seen. The judge opened the file, and within seconds, his face changed. His eyes stopped on something dark, something deeply unsettling. "When was this submitted?" "2 days ago, my lord." The judge began to read softly, as if the words were being carved into the walls. "If anything happens to me—" He didn't finish the sentence. He placed the file on the table. Then his eyes lifted toward Marcus and made a terrifying announcement. "Mr. Taylor, your wife was found dead this morning." For a moment, silence froze everything in the room. Marcus's ears filled with a roaring sound, as if the whole world had shouted, cried, and then gone silent forever. What? That single word, that single question, escaped his mouth. The woman who had stood beside Emma, the one who had smiled with victory just yesterday, now kept her head down, as if trying to sink into the ground.
The judge spoke again, his voice now firm and cold. "According to this evidence, a large sum of money from Emma's insurance account was transferred to this woman's name. And the last call made from Emma's phone last night was also to her. Emma had recorded her concerns, and it appears she knew what was going to happen after the divorce." all the faces in the courtroom changed. The same judge who yesterday saw color first, today was forced to see the truth. A truth that questioned the very principles of his own court. The police moved forward and immediately took the woman into custody. She screamed. It was his plan. He said Emma would agree to everything and Marcus would take the blame. But no one was listening anymore. A storm of emotions rose inside Marcus. Grief, shock, helplessness, but also a quiet sense of victory, one he had never wanted to claim. The judge closed the file, lowered his eyes, and made a historic confession. Mr. Taylor, this court cannot apologize to you, but perhaps for the first time, justice will be given without color. This case is dismissed, and the real criminal will be brought to justice. Marcus said nothing. He just kept looking at Emma's empty chair, as if she was still sitting there silently listening to everything and freeing the truth through her own end. When the court was dismissed, people whispered among themselves. Reporters had their microphones ready, but when Marcus walked out, the light outside stung his eyes. He looked up at the sky. The same sky that had been dark and stormy yesterday was now a soft shade of blue. Someone called from behind, Marcus, you got justice. He didn't stop. He only said in a voice that came straight from his heart, Justice? No. This is only a reminder that truth never dies, no matter how many times it's buried. And as he walked down the courthouse steps, a voice echoed behind him. The judge gave them punishment, but the ones truly ashamed are all of us. The camera slowly pulls back. The courthouse grows smaller, but Marcus's shadow grows longer, stretching across the ground like a question hanging in the air. Can justice ever?
The courtroom door closed, and a long, heavy silence spread over the city. Marcus Taylor was now free, legally, and perhaps according to the bitter ending of this tragedy. But in that freedom, there was an emptiness, a deep void that no verdict in the world could ever fill. Emma's death became a horrifying headline. The next day's newspapers screamed in red, "Racial bias trial takes shocking turn. Mistress arrested for murder plot." And somewhere at the bottom of a page, in small letters, it said, "Husband cleared of all charges." That was all. No one wrote how many times the wall of justice almost collapsed in this trial. No one said that if Emma were alive, this same court might have declared her guilty. When Marcus returned to his apartment, everything was still the same, but nothing felt the same anymore. The pictures hanging on the walls seemed to be watching him. He stood silently before the photo of Emma smiling in a frame. He touched the picture gently and whispered to himself, "I lost you, but maybe losing you saved someone else, Emma." A few days later, a local TV channel offered him an interview. He hesitated at first, then agreed. He thought maybe speaking, sharing the pain, would make the burden lighter. But when the cameras turned on, the questions were the same old ones. Do you think all this happened because of your color? Marcus paused for a moment, then said in a deep voice, "I can't say it was only about color, but if I were white, maybe she would still be alive, and no one would be asking this question." When his words aired on TV, the city erupted. Some said he was telling the truth. Some said he was fueling hate. But the truth was, he was only holding up a mirror to society. Time went on. The trial ended. Newspapers found new scandals. But Marcus's life remained trapped in the shadow of that day. He had quit photography. He didn't take pictures anymore. He only looked at them. Every face reminded him that even a camera is not truly neutral, just like the human eye isn't. One day, he received a letter from a young girl. She wrote, "I saw your story. My mother was black too,
And my father left us because people said we didn't look alike. You gave me courage not to be ashamed.
Marcus read the letter and, for the first time in weeks, smiled. Maybe that was the real meaning of this story, that sharing pain doesn't erase hate, but it can give birth to hope. He picked up his camera again. This time, his lens wasn't focused on shining city streets, but on the faces of those who stood outside courtrooms every day, those who were not in the system, but crushed beneath it. Those photos were silent, yet full of cries, questions, and naked truth. Marcus organized an exhibition of his photos. The title was Faces You Don't See. People came. They looked. Some cried. Some left silently. An old white man came close and said, I was in the courtroom. I saw you. I am ashamed I didn't say anything that day. Marcus simply replied, with the calmness of a photographer, saying it now is enough. Just speak for someone else next time. That evening, when the hall was empty, Marcus stood by the window. The sun was setting, that same orange light Emma used to love. She often said, this light should be the same for everyone, Marcus, for everyone. Marcus looked at the sky, and for the first time, the tears that had been locked inside for years began to fall. Those tears were not only of grief, but of realization that he might never see complete justice, but at least he had pulled the curtain away. There are many kinds of courts in this world, some of law, some of conscience. Laws take time to change, but conscience can awaken in a single moment. And that was the real impact of this story. That for the first time, some people began to think, if color can change justice, then maybe we all are guilty. A few months later, a new law was passed, creating a bias review committee to handle complaints of racial or gender discrimination in courts. It wasn't complete justice, but it was a beginning. Marcus's final photograph was of a small boy standing in front of a courthouse. In his hands was a sign that read, My skin is not evidence. That picture touched thousands of hearts. The narrator's voice fades. They say justice is blind, but the truth is, it only refuses to see. And as long as someone like Marcus dares to show it a mirror, hope will stay alive. The screen slowly fades to black. Silence fills the air. Then one final line appears. This story hasn't ended. It begins where justice starts.